Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another episode of First Impressions, the video series where I review films, either ones that I've been meaning to watch for a while, or ones that are in the middle of their theatrical run. Today, it's one of the former, and it's a film that I heard about a while ago from Spinnernet. It's a guy that I watch his reviews on occasion. I originally started watching him when he was doing wrestling. Then I fell off of his channel for a little bit, and then I went back to it. And I'd say he does pretty good reviews. He talked about this film. I'm like, I gotta give it a watch. A couple months ago, it was on Turner Classic Movies, recorded it. It's been on the DVR ever since. Been meaning to sit down and watch it. So yesterday I sat down and watched it, and I can say I enjoyed it. Now, it does start a bit slow, and that slowness does continue for the first hour. Then it picks up just a tad. So if you don't like slow films, this film is definitely not for you, especially if you don't like black and white films or subtitled films. If you hate that trifecta, you're not going to have a fun time. But if you don't mind that stuff, you will enjoy this film, or at least be able to sit through this film. And the film is M from 1931. It is a German film. So if you know anything about your world history, you might see a little bit of influence from the time in there. I only noticed how the police work with their procedure. You know, everyone having to give up papers. And if they don't have papers, down to the precinct you go! And of course, one scene with the inventory kind of made me like chuckle nervously, like, that's going to be a little bit fun for them in about another 10 years. Why am I laughing? The film is directed by Fritz Lang, and it also was written by him and his wife. And it's considered to be his best film, and he considered it his finest film. It's also the first film that he did in sound, which I don't know how it compares to his previous film, but I could definitely say for his first sound film, he did a pretty good job. His direction is top notch. The way he gets the cinematographer to move the camera is excellent. And there was something that kind of seemed a little familiar about the cinematography, but it's not in the way that I recognize other cinematographers from the more recent film era, where I'm like, oh, that's why those things always got my eye. It was the same cinematographer. Fritz Wagner was the cinematographer, and the reason you'll notice a little subtle similarity if you know your film is because he also did the cinematography for another classic of German cinema, and that was Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. Now, there's a lot of iconic shots from that film, especially the shot of the shadow going up the wall. In this film, they use glass and reflections for emphasis. And there's like a bunch of shots that you can watch at the film. It's like, oh yeah, it's like there's one shot of the camera looking through a shop window glass at one of the characters. That's the one that stands to mind. But there's also a lot of good uses of different high, low angles, and even normal angles. Like the high-low angle that comes to mind is one that was actually used as an example in the film book I had for my last class, and that is, there's a scene early on in the film where this guy sees this other guy talking to a little girl, so he's like, wonder if that's him, walks over and talks to him, like, why do you care where she lives? Does a down angle shot at the shorter guy, and then it does a high angle, down at the one guy, up at the other guy. It's supposed to show dominance and submission. And I think it works well for this scene, more so when you actually watch the scene, because the guy's like, I'm not doing anything. And of course, this scene ties into one of the themes early on in the film, and that is the mob. I think I probably better explain the plot in order to make that comment make sense. The plot of the film is that it takes place in Germany. I didn't notice a specific town name named, but it could be Berlin, it could be any of the other big cities in Germany, it's just there. We have a man going around abducting and killing children. It's been going on for a little bit, and the movie starts with the latest murder. We don't see it on screen because it's 1931. It's just going to be implied. Just like there was another undercurrent I noticed, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And you can imagine the townspeople are none too pleased at this latest murder. They want the cops to find him, and when they don't, they start complaining like, do your job! All the low-time crooks, when they're arrested, they're like, why are you hassling me? You should be looking for the murderer! And whenever somebody thinks they're dealing with the murderer, the mob starts going rampant. It's like, you could be the murderer. He's the murderer. Get him. The mob riot. So it's one of those things like, oh, the police are here. Thank God. And as the film goes on, the police are like, oh, crap, how are we going to find him? There's even one scene where one of the police officers is talking to a superior, and he's saying, my officers are run ragged. They barely have any time to work. most of our leads are false. And it does have that undertone of public panic. And as the film goes on, the criminals of the city are like, you know what, we're tired of these policemen hassling us for something we did not do. We're going to find the killer and do what we want with him. We're going to show the public and the police that this killer has nothing to do with us. Which, if you know anything about the criminal underworld, especially when it comes to the prison system, you know that something like this they would think of, because the lowest people on the totem pole are those who attack children and women. So rapists, child molesters, child killers, they're always on the bottom rung. So it would make sense that all the normal criminals, the thieves, the murderers, the scam artists, all the fraudsters, they'd be like, this guy's giving us a bad name. We're not all child murderers. Which just comes to the other undertone I noticed, and that is he just killing the children, or is there more going on that in the time that could not state, but they could imply? Kind of like with the original Nightmare on Elm Street. With how they talk about Freddy, it's kind of implied that he's also a child molester, but they never openly state it, so it becomes subtext. That was one thing I noticed, especially with Peter Lorre, how he talks about impulses in his magnificent speech scene near the end, when he's in the kangaroo courts. It's like, am I the only one noticing this because I'm watching this in a more modern setting? Or is it just something that they actually intended but they couldn't overly state, especially since this film was made in 1931 Germany, just as the Nazis were beginning their ascent to power? Because I think this was like a year or two before the Reichstag fire, which is what Hitler used to seize full power. So it makes me wonder which it is. It'd be interesting to find out if they intended that, because if so, then I'm glad I caught it. If not, just something I'm putting there, but you could argue it's there, which is why I think this film is one of those classic films that'd be interesting to see a more modern take on. I was thinking, you know, this film could have used a more recent remake as the film was going on, but then I found out there was a more recent remake. Only 20 years more recent from this film, but it's there. And it's a film from the height of the noir period, set in LA, so definitely going to be on my watch list later, and probably my grandmother will be able to watch that one because she couldn't sit through this one. She tried and was like, nah, I don't want to watch the German subtitles. Another little thing I noticed is there's a raid scene about the 30-minute mark, which it feels like it's out of an American film set in Prohibition, just the way the police raid the business, maybe because it's also a bar, and there's a scene of the bartender lady pulling down a thing to cut off people from her side of the bar. Like, yeah, that could have been in Prohibition. Of course, the only difference is she would have been taken down to the Hooskow too. Now, the only actor that I recognize in this film is Peter Lorre, and the only one of his works I've actually seen firsthand is Casablanca, which is one of his most famous works after he came to America. And here, he does a very good job. Most of his acting for the first couple parts of the film is physical, his facial expressions. He does have a little bit of dialogue, but it's mostly selling it through facial expressions. Then the last scene when he actually is cornered into the kangaroo court, that speech he gives is magnificent, and his acting, the look on his face when he's talking about the impulses he gets, how he can't control himself. Which is part of the reason why I think there might be some child molester subtext into the film. But you could just say, yeah, it's just me putting it there. But you could argue it either way. You just got to watch the scene to understand what I'm talking about. Just the way he sells that scene, it's like, if this film had gotten any Academy Award nominations, he should have gotten one for this scene. I did not check to see if it got any nominations, but I don't think they really gave a lot to foreign films at the beginning, or at least just from what I've loosely looked into. I gotta look to see what was the first foreign film that got nominated. It's on the to-do list. And sadly, this was his last major film before he had to flee Germany, because like I said, rise of the Nazis. Lorre was Jewish, so he had to leave. First, he went to the United Kingdom, and that's where he made his next film, which was Alfred Hitchcock's original, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which one of these days I really want to watch the original and rewatch the remake back-to-back to see the differences and the similarities. And it was after that his stock rose. He did Casablanca. His later career, he did a lot of horror films, mainly for Roger Corman, like The Raven. And of course, his distinctive voice made him an icon of cinema like Boris Karloff. I don't think he was ever at the same level as people like Karloff and Lugosi, but people know who he was to the point that his voice would be parodied. And I do want to sit down and watch a little bit more of his work so I can appreciate him a bit more, but just from this at Casablanca, I can say I enjoy him as an actor. Nothing really much else to say about this film. Excellent cinematography, the story is compelling. All the actors do an excellent job. Laurie is the standout. The other German actors, like the one that plays one of the police investigators, he does a good job with his facial features and his vocal inflections. And the pacing I thought worked. I mean, it is a little slow in the tooth at first, but if you get past that, you should enjoy the film.